The silence hit me first. Not the peaceful kind you expect in nature, but the wrong kind. The kind that makes your skin crawl and your heart race before your brain catches up to process why. I stood at the edge of what should have been our campsite, holding my 10-year-old daughter Sophie's hand, staring at nothing. Absolutely nothing. The tents were gone. The cars were gone. The coolers, the camping chairs, the fire pit we'd built together just hours ago, all of it vanished like it never existed. Mom, where is everyone? Sophie's voice sounded small in the vast emptiness of the forest clearing. I couldn't answer her because I was asking myself the same question. My mouth felt dry as dust as I scanned the area again, hoping I was somehow confused about the location. But no, this was definitely our spot. I could see the marks in the dirt where Ryan's truck had been parked. The flattened grass where our tent had stood. The circle of stones from our fire pit, now scattered and cold. We'd only been gone for an hour. Maybe less. Sophie had wanted to see the waterfall she'd heard about from the other kids, and since Ryan and his friends were busy setting up their elaborate fishing gear by the lake, I decided to take her on the short hike. It was supposed to be a nice mother-daughter moment during what had already been a tense weekend. Now I wished I'd never left. Mom? Sophie tugged on my sleeve, her voice getting worried. I forced myself to move, to think, to be the adult she needed me to be. I walked to the center of the clearing, looking for any sign of what had happened. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe someone got hurt and they all rushed to get help. Maybe. That's when I saw it. A single piece of paper weighted down by a rock on the wooden picnic table that the Park Service had installed. The table they'd somehow left behind while taking everything else. My hands shook as I picked up the note. I recognized Ryan's handwriting immediately, even though part of me hoped I was wrong. Zara, it read, "This is for the best. Trust me. You'll understand someday. Take care of yourself." That was it. No explanation. No apology. No instructions on how we were supposed to take care of ourselves, in the middle of nowhere with no supplies, no transportation, and no way to contact anyone. I read it 3 more times, each time hoping the words would change or make more sense. They didn't. What does it say, Mom? I looked down at Sophie, her dark eyes wide with confusion and growing fear. She was wearing the pink hiking boots I'd bought her for this trip, the ones she'd been so excited about. Her backpack was still on her shoulders, containing only a water bottle, some snacks, and her favorite book. How was I supposed to explain to my daughter that her father had abandoned us in the wilderness? That the man who was supposed to protect us both had driven away and left us to die? "There's been a change of plans, baby," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "We're going to have a different kind of adventure." Sophie looked around the empty clearing again. But where did Daddy go? And Mr. Jackson and Mr. Peterson and their families? The families. Ryan's 2 best friends had brought their wives and kids on this trip. I thought about Natalie Peterson, who'd been acting strange all weekend, avoiding eye contact with me and whispering with her husband. About Jessica Jackson, who'd seemed nervous and kept checking her phone even though there was no service. They'd all known. They had all known this was going to happen, and they'd played along with the charade of a fun family camping trip. They'd sat around the fire last night roasting marshmallows and telling stories while planning to abandon a woman and child in the wilderness. The betrayal hit me so hard I actually staggered. I had to grab the edge of the picnic table to steady myself. These weren't strangers. These were people I'd known for years. People I'd invited to my home for dinner. People whose kids played with my daughter. "Mom, you're scaring me." I looked at Sophie and forced myself to focus. I could fall apart later. Right now, I had to figure out how to keep us alive. I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd find. No signal. We were deep in the state forest, at least 20 miles from the main road. The ranger station was even further. Ryan had chosen this spot specifically because it was so remote and beautiful. Now I understood the real reason for his choice. The sun was already starting to sink lower in the sky. In a few hours it would be dark and the temperature would drop. I had no tent, no sleeping bags, no food beyond the granola bars in Sophie's backpack. No flashlight, no matches, no first aid kit. But I wasn't helpless. I'd been camping before, back when I was younger, before I'd let Ryan convince me that I was too soft for outdoor adventures. Before I'd started believing his subtle comments about how I needed taking care of, how I wasn't as capable as other women. Looking around the empty clearing now, abandoned and betrayed, something inside me began to shift. The scared, confused feeling was still there, but underneath it, something harder was taking shape. Something that felt like steel. "Sophie," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Do you remember the camping stories Grandpa used to tell us? About how people used to live in the woods with just what they could carry. She nodded, her fear mixing with curiosity. Well, we're going to learn how to do that. Just you and me. And when we get out of here, and we will get out of here, we're going to be so much stronger than we were before. I stood up and looked around the clearing one more time. Ryan thought he was abandoning a helpless woman who couldn't survive without him. He thought I would panic, give up, and die quietly in the woods while he went back to his real life with whatever woman he'd been sneaking around with. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The forest around us was vast and full of dangers, but as I took Sophie's hand and started planning our survival, I realized something that would have terrified Ryan if he'd known. I was about to become far more dangerous than any wilderness. I read the note 5 more times, each reading making the reality sink deeper into my bones. Ryan's handwriting was calm, controlled the same way he wrote grocery lists or signed birthday cards. There was no emotion in it, no struggle. This wasn't a desperate decision made in panic. This was calculated. Mom, I'm thirsty. Sophie sat down on the picnic table bench, swinging her legs. She still didn't fully understand what was happening, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. Here, baby. I helped her take off her backpack and pulled out her water bottle. As she drank, I took inventory of what we had. 1 water bottle, 3/4 full. 2 granola bars, an apple, and a small bag of trail mix. Sophie's book. My phone with no signal and about 60% battery. The clothes on our backs: jeans, hiking boots, light jackets. Not nearly enough for a night in the forest, let alone however long it might take to get out. I tried to think logically about our situation. The main road was about 20 miles north of here. I remembered the drive-in because I'd been navigating for Ryan. There was a gas station and a small diner where we'd stopped for coffee. If I could get there, I could call for help. But 20 miles through forest with a 10-year-old child, no proper supplies and no clear trail? It would take days, assuming we didn't get lost or hurt. The ranger station was closer, maybe 12 miles east, but the terrain was rougher. I'd heard the men talking about it yesterday, complaining that it was too hard to hike to from our site. Are we going home now? Sophie asked, finishing her water. Not yet, honey. We need to stay here tonight and figure out the best way to get home tomorrow. But we don't have our tent. I know. We'll have to make our own shelter. Like a fort. Her eyes lit up a little at that. Sophie loved building forts in our living room with couch cushions and blankets. This would be different, but I could work with her excitement. I started looking around the clearing with new eyes. There were plenty of fallen branches and pine needles. The weather forecast had been clear for the next few days, so we wouldn't have to worry about rain. The stream where we'd gotten water that morning was about a 1/4 mile away. My phone buzzed, making my heart jump. For a second, I hoped it was Ryan calling to say this was all a terrible mistake. But it was just a low battery warning. I quickly turned it off to save power. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my hand brushed against something else. Ryan's note. I pulled it out and read it again, and this time, details jumped out at me that I'd missed before. This is for the best. Trust me. You'll understand someday. The tone was so condescending, so sure of himself. Like he was doing me a favor. Like abandoning his wife and daughter in the wilderness was somehow an act of kindness. And then it hit me. The reason behind all of this. Natalie Peterson's behavior this weekend suddenly made sense. The way she'd avoided looking at me, the hushed conversations with her husband, the nervous energy. The way she kept finding excuses to talk to Ryan privately. The way Ryan had been distant with me for months, working late, taking mysterious phone calls, being irritable about every little thing. My husband was having an affair. This wasn't just abandonment. This was murder. Slow, calculated murder made to look like an accident. Poor Zara and Sophie, lost in the woods during a camping trip. So tragic. Ryan would play the grieving widower, and after a respectable amount of time, he'd comfort himself with Natalie, whose own marriage would conveniently fall apart from the trauma of losing their friends. They'd probably already worked out the timeline. How long to wait before reporting us missing? What story to tell the authorities? How Ryan had searched everywhere but couldn't find us. How the forest was so dangerous, so easy to get lost in. The rage that hit me was so intense I actually saw red around the edges of my vision. I had to sit down hard on the picnic table bench next to Sophie, my hands clenching into fists. Mom? Are you okay? I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, innocent child who trusted me to keep her safe, and the rage crystallized into something colder and much more dangerous. Determination. Ryan thought I was weak. He thought I was helpless without him. He'd spent years making me believe that I couldn't handle things on my own, that I needed him to take care of me. Every time I'd suggested we try camping or hiking, he'd made excuses or pointed out all the ways I wasn't prepared enough. Every time I'd wanted to learn something new or challenging, he'd found subtle ways to discourage me. He'd systematically made me doubt my own capabilities, and I'd let him. But before Ryan, I'd been different. In college, I'd gone on backpacking trips with friends. I'd rock climbed and kayaked and done all sorts of outdoor activities. I'd been confident and capable and strong. Ryan hadn't fallen in love with a helpless woman, he'd created one. You know what, Sophie? We're going to be just fine. Really? Really? Your mom knows more about camping than you might think. And you're one of the smartest, bravest kids I know. We make a good team. She smiled at that, and I felt some of the fear leave her face. I stood up and looked around the clearing again, but this time I wasn't seeing problems. I was seeing solutions. The slope to the east would give us protection from wind. The large oak tree near the center had strong, low branches perfect for hanging things out of reach of animals. The stream nearby meant fresh water. The abundance of dead wood meant fuel for a fire. Okay, Sophie. First lesson in wilderness survival. Shelter, water, fire, food. In that order. What kind of shelter are we going to build? I walked over to the oak tree and examined its base. A lean-to. We'll use branches and pine needles to make a wall against the tree trunk. It'll keep us warm and dry. Can I help? I'm counting on it. As we started gathering branches, I let my mind work through what came next. I would get us out of this forest safely. I would get home. And then I would make sure that Ryan and everyone who helped him regretted this decision for the rest of their lives. But first we had to survive. And despite everything Ryan believed about me, despite all the doubt he'd planted in my mind over the years, I was going to prove that I was more than capable of keeping my daughter and myself alive. The forest around us was quiet except for the sound of birds and wind in the trees. Peaceful even. Ryan had chosen this place to be our grave, but instead, it was going to be the place where I remembered who I really was. The place where I got my strength back. The lean-to took us 3 hours to build, but when we finished, I felt prouder of it than anything I'd accomplished in years. Sophie had been my eager assistant, dragging smaller branches and gathering armfuls of pine needles while I constructed the frame against the massive oak tree. It looks like a real house, Mom. Sophie crawled inside the shelter and stretched out. And it's bigger than I thought it would be. I'd made it large enough for both of us to lie down comfortably, with extra space for our few belongings. The slanted roof of interwoven branches would shed water if it rained, and the thick carpet of pine needles would insulate us from the cold ground. Good work, partner. I crawled in beside her and we both lay on our backs, looking up at the lattice of branches above us. How does it feel? Cozy. Like a secret hideout. That's exactly what I'd been hoping for. As long as Sophie could see this as an adventure rather than a crisis, she'd be braver and more helpful. And I needed her to be both. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the clearing. Time for the next priority, fire. Come on, let's work on getting a fire started before it gets dark. I'd been mentally preparing for this challenge all afternoon. I had no matches, no lighter, nothing that would make fire easily. But I remembered enough from my youth and from watching survival shows to know there were other ways. The bow drill method would be my best bet. I found a dry piece of cedar for the fireboard and a harder piece of oak for the spindle. Sophie helped me gather tinder dry grass, bark fibers, and the finest twigs we could find. What are you making, Mom? A fire maker. Watch this. It took me almost an hour and left my hands raw and bleeding, but finally, a tiny wisp of smoke began curling up from the tinder nest. I blew on it gently and a small flame flickered to life. You did it. Sophie clapped her hands as I carefully transferred the flame to our prepared fire pit. Soon we had a cheerful blaze going. The warmth felt incredible as the air began to cool with the approaching night. More importantly, the fire would keep animals away and signal our location if anyone came looking for us, though I seriously doubted anyone would. Now what? Sophie asked, sitting cross-legged beside the fire. Now we eat dinner and make plans for tomorrow. We shared one granola bar and half the trail mix, washing it down with water from Sophie's bottle. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Tomorrow I'd need to find more food and water. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did Daddy leave us here? I'd been dreading this question, but Sophie deserved some version of the truth. Sometimes adults make very bad decisions, honey. Daddy made a really bad decision, and now we have to take care of ourselves. Is he coming back? No, baby. He's not. Are we going to be okay? I looked at her across the firelight, this brave little girl who was handling an impossible situation with more grace than most adults would. She deserved the truth about this too. We're going to be better than okay. We're going to get out of here and we're going to be strong and happy and safe. Just you and me. Promise? I promise. After Sophie fell asleep curled up next to me in the lean-to, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the forest and planning. The stream was a quarter-mile away, but I'd need to boil any water we drank to make sure it was safe. That meant keeping the fire going and finding a container to heat water in. Food would be trickier. I knew there were edible plants in this forest: dandelions, clover, wild onions, but I'd have to be absolutely certain of my identifications. Better to go hungry than risk poisoning us both. There might be fish in the stream, though I'd have to figure out how to catch them without proper equipment. But the biggest challenge would be navigation. I was pretty sure the main road was north of us, but pretty sure wasn't good enough when we were walking 20 miles with a child. I'd need to find a way to get my bearings and plot the safest route out. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the dark sky. Above us, stars were appearing in numbers I never saw back home in the city. It was beautiful in a way that would have been peaceful under different circumstances. Instead, I used the quiet time to think about what came next. Not just getting out of the forest, but what I would do when we got home. Ryan thought I was dead. By now, he'd probably started putting on his grieving husband act. Maybe he was at the police station reporting us missing, playing the distraught father who'd searched everywhere for his lost family. The thought of him lying to authorities while Sophie and I fought for our lives in the wilderness made my blood boil again. But I forced myself to stay calm and think strategically. When we got out and we would get out, I'd have proof of what Ryan had done. The note was evidence of abandonment, maybe even attempted murder. My testimony would be even more powerful. Ryan expected me to die out here, so my survival would catch him completely off guard. I'd use that surprise to my advantage. But first, I had to focus on keeping us alive and getting us home. Everything else could wait. Sophie stirred beside me, making small sounds in her sleep. I pulled her closer and felt her relax again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, we were warm and safe and together. Ryan had meant to destroy us, but instead, he'd given me something I'd lost years ago, the knowledge that I could handle anything life threw at me. I fell asleep planning our route home and thinking about all the ways Ryan was going to regret underestimating me. I woke before dawn to the sound of rain pattering on our makeshift roof. For a moment, panic shot through me. Our fire would be out, we'd be wet and cold, everything would be so much harder. But as I listened more carefully, I realized the rain was light, and our shelter was holding. Only a few drops were making it through the layered branches. "Good morning, Mom." Sophie's voice was thick with sleep but cheerful. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" "Really good. Our house worked." I smiled in the dim pre-dawn light. Our house. She was still treating this like an adventure, which meant I was doing something right. The fire had died down to coals during the night, but a few were still glowing. I carefully fed them with dry tinder I'd stored under the lean-to, and soon had flames going again. The warmth felt wonderful in the cool morning air. "Are we going to start walking today?" Sophie asked as we shared our breakfast, the remaining granola bar and apple, cut into careful portions. "Not yet. We need to prepare more first. Walking 20 miles is a big job, and we need to make sure we're ready." What I didn't tell her was that I'd been lying awake since about 3 in the morning, trying to remember everything I could about the route we'd taken to get here. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I didn't know the area well enough to risk it yet. We needed more supplies, more information, and a clearer plan. So what are we going to do today? We're going to explore a little. Find the stream, look for food, and see if we can find a better way out of here. The light rain had stopped by the time we finished breakfast and banked the fire. I filled Sophie's water bottle at the stream and used my makeshift boiling setup. A large piece of bark formed into a bowl with hot stones to heat the water. It was slow and inefficient, but it worked. While the water cooled, we explored along the stream bank. I found wild onions, which would add flavor to anything else we managed to find. Sophie discovered a patch of dandelions, and I showed her which parts were edible. "The whole plant is good for you," I explained as we gathered leaves and flowers. "Grandpa taught me that when I was about your age." Grandpa knew about camping? He grew up during hard times when people had to know how to find food anywhere they could. It felt good to share that connection with Sophie, to show her that survival skills were part of our family history. My grandfather had lived through the Depression and World War II. He taught me to fish, to identify edible plants, to read weather patterns, and to find my way in the woods using natural landmarks. I'd forgotten most of it during my years with Ryan, but being out here was bringing it back. As we worked our way along the stream, gathering food and getting familiar with the area, I found myself thinking more about the events that had led us here. The signs had all been there, but I'd been too trusting to see them. Ryan's late nights at the office had started about 6 months ago. His phone habits had changed. He'd started keeping it face down, taking it with him to the bathroom, getting irritated if I came near when he was texting. He'd been more critical of me, finding fault with everything from how I cleaned the house to how I dressed. And then there were the comments about this camping trip. How it would be good for me to get out of my comfort zone. How I needed to toughen up and stop being so dependent on modern conveniences. How this would be a test to see if I could handle real adventure. I thought he was trying to encourage me to be more outdoorsy. Now I realized he'd been setting up the narrative for my disappearance. Mom, look. Sophie pointed upstream, where the water curved around a large boulder. Is that a fish? I followed her gaze and saw several dark shapes moving in the deeper water. Trout, probably. My stomach rumbled at the thought of fresh protein. Good eye, honey. Let's see if we can figure out how to catch some. I spent the next hour rigging up a fishing system using a sharp stick, some plant fibers twisted into line, and a hook made from a safety pin on Sophie's backpack. It was primitive, but fish had been caught with less. While we waited to see if anything would bite, I let my mind continue working through the timeline of betrayal. The camping trip had been Ryan's idea, of course. He'd suggested it casually about a month ago, saying his friends wanted to do a big group adventure before summer ended. I'd been hesitant at first. I wasn't close with the other wives, and Sophie was sometimes shy in group settings. But Ryan had been insistent. He'd made it sound like I was being antisocial and difficult for not wanting to go. He'd used his favorite manipulation technique, making me feel like I was the problem for having reasonable concerns. Now I could see it for what it was. He needed me to come willingly to be part of the group so that when Sophie and I disappeared, it would look like a tragic accident rather than a planned crime. I think I felt something. Sophie grabbed the makeshift fishing rod with excitement. Sure enough, we had a fish, a small trout, but enough to make a significant difference to our food supply. Sophie was thrilled, and I felt a surge of pride in both of us. We were doing this. We were surviving. As we headed back to our shelter with our catch, I thought about the other people who'd been part of this plan. Ryan's two best friends, Tom Jackson and Ben Peterson, and their wives Jessica and Natalie. Jessica had seemed uncomfortable all weekend, like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. I'd attributed it to her being shy, but now I wondered if she'd been struggling with guilt over what they were planning. Natalie, on the other hand, had been different. Confident in a way I'd never seen before. She'd kept catching Ryan's eye across the campfire, sharing little smiles and inside jokes. She'd touched his arm when she talked to him, stood closer to him than was appropriate. The affair was definitely with Natalie. I was sure of it now. Which meant her husband Ben was either in on it or about to become another victim of their plan. Either way, none of them had cared about collateral damage. They'd been willing to let a child die to cover up an affair. That knowledge burned in my chest as I cleaned the fish and prepared it for cooking. Sophie helped gather more firewood, chattering excitedly about our successful fishing expedition. We're getting really good at this, aren't we, Mom? We are. You know what? I think we might be tougher than anyone expected. Including me. Each challenge we overcame, each small success we achieved, was building my confidence. I was remembering who I used to be before Ryan convinced me I was helpless. That night, as we ate our dinner of fish, wild onions and dandelion greens, I made a decision. Sophie, how would you feel about staying here a few more days? Really learning how to live in the woods before we start the long walk out. Her face lit up. Really? Like a real camping trip. Exactly like that. We'll practice all our survival skills, explore the area better, and make sure we're completely ready for the journey home. What I didn't tell her was that I wanted Ryan to have time to fully commit to his story. I wanted him to file the missing person reports, give interviews to the police, maybe even organize search parties. I wanted him to be completely convinced that his plan had worked. Because when we walked out of these woods strong, capable, and very much alive, I wanted him to be utterly unprepared for what came next. The fire crackled between us as Sophie planned all the things we'd learn and explore. She had no idea that our extended camping trip was actually the first phase of my revenge. But she would understand someday when she was old enough to know what her father had tried to do to us. And by then, Ryan would have learned that the biggest mistake of his life was underestimating the woman he'd married. By our fourth day in the forest, we had developed a routine that would have impressed any survival instructor. Sophie woke with the sun, helped me revive the fire, and gathered kindling while I prepared whatever food we'd managed to find the day before. After breakfast, we'd explore a different section of the area, always staying within a mile of our shelter, learning the landscape and finding resources. Our lean-to had evolved into something more permanent. We'd built walls on 3 sides now, with a proper entrance and storage areas for our growing collection of supplies. I'd woven baskets from willow branches to carry water and food. Sophie had become expert at identifying edible plants and spotting fish in the stream. "Mom, I found mushrooms." Sophie called from near a fallen log about 50 yards from our camp. I hurried over, my heart jumping between excitement and fear. Mushrooms could be incredibly nutritious, but they could also kill us if I identified them wrong. The cluster growing on the dead oak log looked familiar. Oyster mushrooms, if I was remembering correctly. I examined them carefully, checking every detail against my fuzzy memory of field guides I'd read years ago. The shape, color, and growing pattern all seemed right. "What do you think?" Sophie asked, trusting my judgment completely. That trust was both heartwarming and terrifying. Every decision I made out here affected both our lives. But it was also empowering. For years, Ryan had made me doubt my own judgment about everything from what to cook for dinner to which route to take to the store. Now, with life or death choices to make every day, I was learning to trust myself again. "I think they're safe," I said finally. "But we'll only try a small amount first to make sure." We added the mushrooms to our growing food stores back at camp. Our larder now included dried fish jerky I'd made by smoking strips over the fire, various nuts and berries, roots I'd dug up and processed, and greens that we gathered fresh each day. We were eating better than I'd expected, and the physical demands of our new lifestyle were making us both stronger. Sophie had always been active, but now she was developing real endurance and strength. Her initial homesickness and fear had given way to confidence and pride in our accomplishments. As for me, I barely recognized myself. My soft office hands were now calloused and capable. My body was lean and strong from the constant activity. Most importantly, my mind was sharper and more focused than it had been in years. "Are we going to practice fire making again today?" Sophie asked as we ate our lunch of fish and wild greens. "Good idea. You're getting better at it, but I want you to be able to start a fire even if something happens to me." It was a grim thought, but a necessary one. If I got injured or sick, Sophie needed to be able to keep us both alive until help came. Not that help was coming. By now, Ryan would have reported us missing. Search parties might even be looking for us, but they'd be searching in the wrong places. Ryan would send them away from where we actually were, claiming he'd already checked this area thoroughly. The thought of search and rescue teams wasting time and resources because of Ryan's lies made me angry all over again. But I pushed the anger aside and focused on the task at hand. Sophie was getting surprisingly good with the bow drill. Her small hands were more nimble than mine, and she was persistent in a way that impressed me. After about 20 minutes of steady work, she had a coal glowing in her tinder bundle. "I did it." She carefully transferred the coal to our prepared fire setup and blew gently until flames caught. "Look, Mom. I'm so proud of you." And I was. My 10-year-old daughter was developing skills that most adults would never learn. "You're becoming a real wilderness expert." That afternoon, we hiked further than we'd gone before, following the stream toward what I hoped was the main river system. If I could find a larger waterway, it might lead us to civilization more easily than trying to navigate overland. About 2 miles upstream we found what I was looking for. The small stream we'd been following joined a much larger creek, which in turn appeared to flow toward the north, the direction I thought we needed to go. But more importantly, near the junction I found signs of human activity. Old campsites with fire rings and worn paths. This was clearly a popular spot for hikers and fishermen, which meant there might be established trails leading out to roads. "This is good news," I told Sophie as we explored the area. "This means people come here regularly. There might be trails we can follow." "Are we going to leave soon?" I heard something in her voice, not eagerness to leave, but sadness at the thought of ending our adventure. Over the past few days, we'd grown closer than we'd ever been. We'd worked as a team, relied on each other, and discovered capabilities neither of us knew we had. "Not yet," I said, understanding her feelings completely. "We'll stay until we're absolutely ready. But Sophie, we can't live out here forever. You need to go back to school, see your friends, sleep in your own bed." "I know. This has been really fun. And I like how strong we are now." I knelt down and hugged her tight. "We'll always be this strong, baby. What we've learned out here, what we've done together, that's not going away when we go home. Promise." "Promise." That evening, as we worked on improving our shelter and preparing food for the next day, I thought about what Sophie had said. We were strong now. Stronger than we'd ever been. And we weren't going to lose that strength when we left the forest. I'd been thinking about our return to civilization as the end of our survival period, but really, it was just the beginning of a different kind of survival. The skills we'd learned out here, self-reliance, problem-solving, confidence in our abilities, those would serve us well in the battles ahead. Because there would be battles. Ryan thought he'd eliminated the only obstacle to his new life with Natalie. When he discovered that Sophie and I were not only alive but thriving, he'd fight back with everything he had. But he'd be fighting the old version of me, the woman who'd let him make her doubt herself. He had no idea what the new version was capable of. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. When we go home, are we going to live with Daddy again? I'd been wondering when this question would come. Sophie was smart, and she'd had time to think about the implications of finding that note. No, sweetheart. We're not. Because he left us here? Because he made choices that mean he can't be part of our family anymore. Will we be okay without him? I looked around our cozy shelter, thought about everything we'd accomplished in just 4 days and smiled. Sophie, we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be amazing. She grinned back at me and I could see that she believed it. More importantly, I believed it too. That night, as I lay listening to the forest sounds and planning our eventual exit, I thought about the woman I'd been when we'd arrived here. Dependent, uncertain, always looking to others for validation and guidance. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who could build shelter, make fire, find food, and protect her child in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. Ryan had meant to destroy me, but instead, he'd forged me into something much more dangerous than he could have imagined. Someone who was ready to fight back. On our 7th morning in the forest, I woke to the sound of a helicopter in the distance. Sophie heard it too and sat up quickly in our improved shelter. Is that someone looking for us? Maybe, I said, though I suspected it was just routine Forest Service activity. If Ryan was running searches, he'd be directing them away from our actual location. We'd spent the past week not just surviving but thriving. Our camp was now a small homestead with multiple structures, food storage, and all the comforts we could create from natural materials. Sophie had become genuinely skilled at outdoor living, and I'd regained confidence I'd forgotten I possessed. But it was time to go home. Not because we couldn't continue living here, but because I had plans that required us to return to civilization. Today's the day, I announced as we shared our breakfast of fish, berries, and the mushrooms that had proven safe and delicious. We're going to start our journey out. Sophie's face showed mixed emotions, excitement about going home, but sadness about leaving our wilderness sanctuary. Are we taking the trail we found yesterday? I'd spent 2 days scouting the hiking paths that led away from the popular fishing spot. One trail clearly headed northeast toward what had to be the main forest road. It was well marked and maintained, nothing like the rough terrain we'd have faced trying to navigate cross-country. That's the plan. It's about 8 miles to the road, and from there we should be able to get help quickly. We packed our few possessions, Sophie's original backpack, now supplemented with woven containers holding extra food and supplies. I'd made us both walking sticks and ensured we had enough food and water for the journey, plus extra in case we encountered delays. Before we left, I took one last look around our camp. Part of me was genuinely sad to leave it behind. This place had become home in a way our house with Ryan never had. Here we'd been completely ourselves, completely capable, completely free. Ready? I asked Sophie. Ready. The hike to the main road took us about 4 hours, including rest stops and one brief detour when we encountered a black bear that was more interested in berry bushes than in us. Sophie handled even that potentially dangerous situation with calm confidence that amazed me. When we finally reached the paved Forest Service road, I had to sit down for a moment to process the transition back to civilization. After a week of measuring time by the sun and navigating by natural landmarks, the straight line of asphalt felt surreal. Now what? Sophie asked. Now we wait for someone to come by, or we start walking toward the ranger station. We didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, a Forest Service truck appeared around the bend. I stepped into the road and waved, and the truck pulled over immediately. "Oh my God," the ranger said as he jumped out. "Are you Zara Thompson? And Sophie?" "Yes, we are." "Ma'am, there's been a massive search going on for you too. Everyone thought." He shook his head in amazement. "How long have you been missing?" 7 days, I said simply. He radioed in our discovery immediately, then helped us into his truck. As we drove toward the ranger station, he peppered us with questions about where we'd been and how we'd survived. Sophie proudly told him about our shelter, our fishing, and all the skills we'd learned. "Your husband said you'd never been camping before," the ranger said, looking confused. "He was convinced you wouldn't know how to survive out there." "My husband was wrong about a lot of things," I replied. At the ranger station, everything became a whirlwind of activity. EMTs checked us over and declared us surprisingly healthy for people who'd been lost in the wilderness for a week. Police officers took our statements. A local news crew somehow showed up and wanted to interview us about our miraculous survival. Through it all, I stayed calm and told a carefully edited version of the truth. Yes, we'd gotten separated from our group during a hike. No, we hadn't been able to find our way back to the campsite. Yes, we'd managed to survive by using basic wilderness skills and staying calm. I didn't mention the note. Not yet. Your husband is on his way, one of the officers told me. He should be here within the hour. Actually, I said, I'd prefer to see my sister first. Could someone call her for me? I gave them Amanda's number and asked for a private moment to speak with her. When she answered, I could hear the shock and relief in her voice. Zara? Oh my God, they said you were missing, they thought you were dead. Amanda, I need you to listen very carefully. Don't react to what I'm about to tell you, and don't say anything to anyone else until you get here. Ryan didn't lose us in the forest. He abandoned us there deliberately. I have proof. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Amanda? I'm here. I'm processing. Are you sure? Completely sure. Can you come get us? I don't want to go anywhere with Ryan. I'm already in my car. I'll be there in 2 hours. Thank you. And Amanda? Don't tell anyone else we're alive until you get here. Not Mom, not Dad, nobody. Why? Because I want to see how committed Ryan is to his grieving widower act before I pull the rug out from under him. When I hung up, the officer looked concerned. Is everything okay? Your husband is very eager to see you. I'm sure he is, I said. But my daughter and I have been through a trauma, and I think it would be better if we went with family first, got cleaned up, and had some time to process everything before we're thrust back into normal life. It was a reasonable request, and the officer agreed. When Ryan arrived at the ranger station an hour later, I watched through the window as the staff told him that his wife and daughter were safe but had already left with other family members. The expression on his face was everything I'd hoped for. Shock, disbelief, and underneath it all, the beginning of fear. He'd been so certain we were dead. So sure his plan had worked perfectly. Now he had to figure out what we might know, what we might say, and how to maintain his innocent husband act when his world was crumbling around him. As Amanda's car pulled into the parking lot, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The revenge phase of our adventure was about to begin, and Ryan had no idea what was coming for him. Amanda's house had always been my safe haven, but it felt especially comforting now as Sophie and I settled into the guest room. My sister had taken one look at us when she arrived at the ranger station and immediately understood that something much bigger was happening than a simple hiking mishap. Tell me everything, she said once Sophie was settled in front of the TV with her favorite cartoons and a stack of snacks she'd been craving all week. I handed her Ryan's note and watched her face change as she read it. This is... She looked up at me, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. This is evidence of attempted murder. That's what I thought too. Zara, we have to call the police right now. Not yet. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table. I need to know exactly what story Ryan told everyone first. I need to see how far he's committed to his lies before I reveal what really happened. Amanda stared at me like I'd grown a second head. What do you mean not yet? He tried to kill you and Sophie. And he's going to pay for it. But if I do this wrong, he'll find a way to talk his way out of it. Rich, charming men have a way of making everyone believe their version of events. I need to be strategic. The truth was, the week in the wilderness had changed me more than Amanda could understand. I wasn't the same woman who'd let Ryan manipulate and control her for years. I'd learned to think tactically, to plan several moves ahead, to trust my instincts. I wasn't going to blow my chance for real justice by acting on emotion. Okay, Amanda said slowly. What do you need me to do? Help me understand what's been happening while we were gone. What did Ryan tell everyone? What's his story? Amanda pulled out her phone and showed me a Facebook post from 3 days ago. It was Ryan, looking appropriately haggard and desperate, asking for prayers and volunteers to help search for his missing family. According to him, Amanda said, you and Sophie went for a walk after lunch last Tuesday and never came back. He says he searched everywhere, called your names for hours, then hiked out to get help when it got dark. I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of people offering support, sharing the post, organizing search parties. My heart clenched seeing how many friends and neighbors genuinely cared about our safety. What about the others? The families who were with us. That's the interesting part. Tom and Jessica Jackson backed up his story completely. But Ben Peterson and his wife, there was something off about them. Ben seemed genuinely shocked when they found out you were missing. Like he had no idea it was going to happen. That matched my suspicions. Ben hadn't known about the plan. He'd been used by his wife and Ryan just like Sophie and I had been. Has Ryan been staying at our house? No, that's another weird thing. He's been staying at a hotel, claiming the house has too many memories and he can't bear to be there. But Zara? Amanda hesitated. What? I drove by your house yesterday just to check on it. Natalie Peterson's car was in your driveway. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Ryan and Natalie weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. They thought I was dead, so they were already moving forward with their new life together. Perfect, I said, and Amanda looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Perfect? Your husband's affair partner is living in your house while everyone thinks you're dead, and you think that's perfect. It means they're confident. Overconfident. People make mistakes when they think they've already won. I stood up and started pacing, my mind working through possibilities. I need to see what else they've been doing. Are they making funeral arrangements? Has Ryan been to see lawyers about life insurance? I don't know, but I can find out. Mom's been talking to some of the neighbors, trying to get information about the search efforts. Good. But don't tell Mom we're alive yet. Don't tell anyone. Zara, this is crazy. People are worried sick about you. I know, and I hate that. But if I reveal we're alive now, Ryan will have time to prepare his defense. He'll claim he left that note because he was having a breakdown, or he was confused, or any number of things that might create reasonable doubt. I sat back down and took Amanda's hands. I need him to keep digging himself deeper. I need him to file insurance claims, make funeral plans, maybe even propose to Natalie. I need him so committed to this path that he can't talk his way out of it when the truth comes out. Amanda was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. How long? A few more days. Maybe a week at most. And what about Sophie? She's been asking when she can call her friends, when she can go back to school. Sophie's stronger than you know. She'll understand when I explain it to her. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Amanda and I spent hours online researching everything we could find about Ryan's activities over the past week. Social media, local news coverage, public records, anything that might give us insight into his state of mind and his plans. What we found was enlightening. Ryan had been very busy playing the grieving husband. He'd given multiple interviews to local news stations, each one more dramatic than the last. He'd set up a GoFundMe for search and rescue efforts, one that had already raised over $10,000. Most tellingly, he'd been to see our lawyer 3 days ago, ostensibly to discuss what happens next if we weren't found. He's moving fast, Amanda observed as we read through everything we'd found. Too fast. That's going to work in our favor. The next morning, I called the law firm that had handled our wills and estate planning. Mrs. Thompson. The receptionist sounded shocked. We heard. I mean, everyone thought. I'm alive, I said simply. And I need to speak with Mr. Williams immediately about my husband's recent visit. 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with our lawyer, learning that Ryan had indeed been asking about life insurance policies, the process for declaring someone dead, and how quickly he could gain access to our joint assets. He seemed very focused on the financial aspects, Mr. Williams said carefully. I have to admit, I was surprised by his priorities so soon after your disappearance. I need you to document everything he said and did during that meeting. And I need you to put a hold on any actions involving our shared accounts or assets. Of course. May I ask, are you in some kind of danger? Not anymore. But I will be filing for divorce very soon, and I suspect my husband is going to be dealing with criminal charges as well. After I hung up, I felt a grim satisfaction. Ryan was making this easier than I'd expected. Every step he took to profit from our supposed deaths was another nail in his legal coffin. My phone rang and I saw Ryan's number on the display. For a moment, I was tempted to answer just to hear his voice when he realized I was alive. But it was too soon. Let him wonder where we were and what we knew. Let him panic a little longer. Was that him? Amanda asked. Yes. He's probably heard from someone that we were found alive. He's trying to figure out what we're going to say. What are you going to say? I smiled, and Amanda later told me it was the most dangerous expression she'd ever seen on my face. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. But first, I'm going to let him hang himself with his own lies. The counterattack was about to begin. 3 days after our rescue, I walked into the offices of Catherine Stone, the best divorce attorney in the city. Amanda had made the appointment under her name to keep Ryan from finding out, and Catherine had agreed to see me immediately after hearing the basics of my situation. Mrs. Thompson, she said as I sat down across from her impressive mahogany desk, I have to say, in 20 years of practicing family law, I've never heard anything quite like this. I'd spent the past hour telling her everything: the camping trip, the note, our week in the wilderness, and all of Ryan's activities since he'd thought we were dead. Catherine had listened without interruption, taking careful notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. The abandonment alone is grounds for divorce, but combined with the attempted insurance fraud and his accelerated relationship with Ms. Peterson, we have a very strong case, she continued. However, I have to ask, are you certain you don't want to pursue criminal charges first? I want to file for divorce and custody immediately, but I want to coordinate with the district attorney's office. I don't want Ryan to be able to use any legal proceedings to avoid criminal responsibility. Smart thinking. I have contacts in the DA's office. We can arrange a meeting for tomorrow. As I left Catherine's office with a thick folder of legal documents to review, I felt a sense of momentum building. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd hoped. My phone had been ringing constantly for 2 days. Ryan, his friends, neighbors, reporters wanting to interview the miracle survival family. I hadn't answered any of them. Let Ryan wonder what I was planning. Let him worry about what I might say. Meanwhile, Amanda had been gathering intelligence through our shared network of friends and neighbors. The picture she was painting of Ryan's week was even worse than I'd imagined. He's been telling people that you probably died on the first night, she reported over dinner. He's been saying you weren't prepared for wilderness survival, that you would have panicked and made bad decisions. Sophie looked up from her plate with a frown. But we did great in the wilderness. We were really good at it. Yes, we were, I agreed. Your father just doesn't know us as well as he thought he did. He's also been meeting with a realtor, Amanda continued. Apparently he's thinking about selling the house because it has too many memories. Of course he was. He wanted to cash in on everything as quickly as possible and start his new life with Natalie. There's more, Amanda said, lowering her voice. I talked to Jennifer Walsh today, you know, the one whose husband works at the bank. Ryan tried to access your life insurance policy yesterday. That was the final straw. The abandonment, the lies, even the affair. I might have eventually forgiven those, given time and therapy and genuine remorse. But trying to profit from our supposed deaths while we were fighting for our lives in the wilderness? That was unforgivable. Did the bank give him access? No. Apparently there are rules about waiting periods when someone is just missing versus confirmed dead. But he was pushing hard for them to make an exception. I pulled out my phone and called Catherine Stone's after-hours number. Mrs. Thompson? Is everything all right? I need you to file an emergency motion to freeze all our joint assets first thing tomorrow morning. And I need to move up that meeting with the DA. Ryan's escalating his attempts to access insurance money. I'll make some calls tonight. We can probably get you in to see the prosecutor tomorrow afternoon. After I hung up, Sophie looked at me with serious eyes. Mom, are you going to send Daddy to jail? It was a hard question, but Sophie deserved an honest answer. I'm going to tell the truth about what he did to us. If that means he goes to jail, then that's his choice for the actions he took. Good, she said firmly, and her certainty surprised me. What he did was wrong. He could have gotten us killed. My daughter was right. If we'd been less capable, less lucky, or if the weather had turned bad, Ryan's plan would have worked exactly as intended. We would have died out there, and he would have collected insurance money and lived happily ever after with his mistress. The next morning, Catherine filed motions for emergency divorce proceedings, immediate custody of Sophie, and the freezing of all marital assets. By noon, Ryan had been served with papers at the hotel where he'd been staying. According to Amanda's sources, his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Shock, anger, and panic in that order. He'd been calling my phone nonstop for hours, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. I listened to a few of them and the progression was telling. At first, he was trying to sound like the concerned husband. Zara, thank God you're alive. We need to talk about what happened. I can explain everything. By the fourth message, his true nature was showing through. You're being ridiculous. You don't understand the situation. You're going to regret making this public. By the eighth message, he was in full manipulation mode. Think about Sophie. Do you really want to put her through a custody battle? Do you really want to destroy our family over a misunderstanding? The final message was pure threat. I have lawyers too, Zara. Good ones. And I have friends in this town. Don't think you can just destroy my life because you're upset. I saved every single voicemail as evidence. That afternoon, I sat in the district attorney's office with Catherine beside me and two prosecutors across from us. Detective Rodriguez, who'd been assigned to investigate our disappearance, was there as well. Mrs. Thompson, the lead prosecutor said, what you're describing sounds like attempted murder, fraud, and potentially conspiracy. These are very serious charges. I understand that. I also understand that Ryan is a well-respected businessman with connections in this community. That's why I wanted to gather as much evidence as possible before coming forward. I handed over copies of everything: Ryan's note, photos of our wilderness camp, documentation of his attempts to access insurance money, records of his meetings with lawyers and realtors, and screenshots of his social media posts. The abandonment itself might be hard to prove beyond reasonable doubt, Detective Rodriguez said as he reviewed the evidence. But combined with the insurance fraud attempts and the timeline of his other activities, we have a pattern that's very difficult to explain away. What about the other couple? Catherine asked. The Jacksons who corroborated his story? We'll be interviewing them separately, the prosecutor replied. If they were part of a conspiracy, they'll face charges too. If they were just covering for a friend without knowing the full extent of the plan, they might be willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity. As we wrapped up the meeting, the lead prosecutor looked at me with what might have been admiration. Mrs. Thompson, I have to say, the way you've handled this situation, gathering evidence, building a case, thinking strategically rather than just emotionally, it's impressive. Most people in your situation would have come forward immediately and we might not have had enough evidence to make charges stick. Ryan spent years convincing me I wasn't smart enough to handle difficult situations on my own, I replied. It turns out he was wrong about that too. As Catherine and I left the courthouse, I felt a sense of completion. The legal machinery was now in motion. Ryan would face consequences for his actions, both civil and criminal. But more importantly, Sophie and I were free. Free from his manipulation, his control, and his attempts to make us doubt our own capabilities. The wilderness had taught us that we were stronger than we'd ever imagined. Now it was time to build a life that reflected that strength. Exactly 10 days after Ryan had abandoned us in the forest, I was sitting in my lawyer's office when Detective Rodriguez called with news I'd been waiting for. We arrested Ryan this morning, he said. Charges include attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. His friends Tom and Jessica Jackson are being charged as accessories. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me, followed immediately by relief. It was really happening. Ryan was finally going to face consequences for what he'd done. What about Natalie Peterson? Interesting development there. Turns out her husband Ben filed for divorce yesterday and is cooperating fully with our investigation. He had no idea about the plan to abandon you, and he's providing evidence about his wife's affair and her involvement in the conspiracy. Poor Ben. Like me, he'd been betrayed by the person he trusted most. Unlike me, he hadn't seen it coming until it was too late. When will you need me to testify? We'll want to go over your testimony in detail next week, but Mrs. Thompson? With all the evidence you've gathered and the way Ryan's been acting since you filed for divorce, this is going to be a very strong case. After I hung up, Catherine Stone smiled at me from across her desk. Good news on the criminal front. Now let's talk about the civil side. Ryan's assets are frozen, but we've uncovered some interesting financial information. She slid a folder across to me. It turns out your husband has been planning this for longer than we thought. He's been moving money into accounts that only he could access for the past 6 months. He's also been forging your signature on documents. I flipped through the financial records, feeling my anger burn cold and steady. The systematic way he'd been planning my elimination was breathtaking in its calculation. How much are we talking about? Nearly $200,000 that he moved without your knowledge. Plus there's the life insurance policy he tried to claim, which was worth $500,000. My hands tightened on the papers. He'd been planning to collect $700,000 from my death, money that was supposed to secure Sophie's future. We're going to get it all back, Catherine continued. Every penny plus damages. And given the circumstances, you'll likely get full custody of Sophie with minimal visitation rights for Ryan, assuming he's not in prison. That evening, I finally decided it was time to see Ryan face to face. He'd been calling and texting constantly since his arrest that morning, alternating between threats and desperate pleas for me to visit him at the county jail. I had no intention of reconciling with him or dropping charges, but I wanted to look him in the eye and let him know exactly how thoroughly he'd underestimated me. The jail visiting room was depressing: fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, thick glass separating visitors from inmates. When Ryan was brought out in his orange jumpsuit, he looked smaller than I remembered. Defeated. I picked up the phone on my side of the glass and waited for him to do the same. Zara. His voice was hoarse, desperate. Thank God you came. I can explain everything. I'm not here for explanations, Ryan. I'm here so you can see exactly what you failed to destroy. He flinched at my tone. You don't understand. I never meant for you to get hurt. I needed space to figure things out. You abandoned your wife and child in the wilderness with no supplies, no transportation, and no way to call for help. You left a note saying it was for the best. You then tried to collect on my life insurance policy while I was fighting to keep our daughter alive in the forest. It wasn't supposed to go that far. I thought the ranger station was closer. I thought you'd find help quickly. You're lying. You chose that campsite specifically because it was remote. You made sure we had no way to contact anyone. You wanted us to die out there. Ryan's face crumpled. I was confused. Natalie made me think. She said you'd be better off without me. That Sophie would be better off. Don't you dare blame this on someone else. And don't you dare claim this was about our well-being when you were stealing our money and planning to cash in on our deaths. I stood up, ready to leave. You spent years making me believe I was weak and incapable. You convinced me I couldn't handle difficult situations without your help. It turns out the only thing I couldn't handle was being married to someone who was actively working to undermine me. Zara, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. Think about Sophie. She needs her father. Sophie needs to be safe from people who would abandon her in the wilderness. She needs to see that actions have consequences. She needs to learn that strong women don't accept being treated as disposable. I hung up the phone and walked away, ignoring his frantic attempts to get my attention through the glass. As I drove home to Amanda's house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For years, I'd been making excuses for Ryan's behavior, minimizing his manipulation, convincing myself that his treatment of me was normal. Seeing him in that jail jumpsuit, desperate and powerless, had finally broken the last hold he'd had over me. He wasn't the confident, controlling man who'd made me doubt myself. He was just a weak person who'd been willing to commit murder rather than face the consequences of his affair. When I got home, Sophie looked up from her homework with curious eyes. Did you see Daddy? I did. How was he? Scared. Sorry. But mostly just making excuses for what he did. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. Are you glad you went? Yes. Because now I know for sure that we're going to be fine without him. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she said something that broke my heart and filled me with pride at the same time. Mom, I'm glad we went camping. Not the part where Daddy left us, but the part where we learned how strong we are. Me too, baby. Me too. Over the next few weeks, Ryan's world continued to collapse around him. The local news picked up the story and public opinion was swift and brutal. His business partners distanced themselves from him. His friends stopped returning his calls. The community that had once respected him now saw him as a man who tried to murder his own family. Natalie Peterson, meanwhile, had fled town the day after Ryan's arrest. Apparently, the reality of being associated with attempted murder was less appealing than the fantasy of running away with a grieving widower's insurance money. Ben Peterson stopped by Amanda's house one evening to apologize and to let me know he was cooperating fully with the prosecution. I had no idea, he said, his eyes red with exhaustion and shame. I thought we were just going on a camping trip. When Ryan said you'd gotten lost, I believed him completely. It's not your fault, Ben. We were all manipulated by people we trusted. How are you handling all this? I feel like I'm falling apart and I wasn't even the primary target. I looked around Amanda's living room, where Sophie was building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions, the same way she'd built our shelter in the forest. She was laughing and happy, completely absorbed in her project. We're surviving, I said. We're good at that now. The reckoning was complete. Ryan had gambled everything on his ability to eliminate the inconvenient parts of his life and start fresh. Instead, he'd lost his freedom, his reputation, his money, and his family. Most importantly, he'd lost his power over me. And I was just getting started. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new house, watching Sophie help her new friend Emma build a treehouse in our backyard. We'd moved 3 hours away from our old town, to a place where nobody knew our story and we could write our own narrative. The house was smaller than our old one, but it was ours. Ryan would be in prison for the next 8 years, and every asset we'd shared was now mine and Sophie's. More importantly, it was a house chosen by someone who trusted her own judgment about what made a good home. Mom, can Emma stay for dinner? Sophie called through the back door. Of course, I called back. Just wash your hands first. 6 months ago, I would have stressed about whether I had enough food prepared, whether the house was clean enough for guests, whether I was being a good enough hostess. Now I just smiled and started setting an extra place at the table. The confidence I'd gained in the wilderness had translated into every area of my life. I'd started my own consulting business, helping small companies with project management and strategic planning. It turned out that someone who could build shelter from nothing and navigate through crisis was exactly what a lot of businesses needed. More importantly, I was raising Sophie to be strong and self-reliant. She took karate classes now, and we went camping every month, real camping with proper equipment, but also with the knowledge that we could survive with nothing if we had to. "How's the treehouse coming along?" I asked as the girls came in for dinner. "Great. Emma said she wants to learn how to make a real shelter like we did in the forest," Sophie said proudly. I told her about the lean-to and the fire making and everything. Emma, a quiet girl from Sophie's new school, looked at me with wide eyes. "Is it true you survived in the woods for a whole week with no supplies?" "We did," I said. Sophie was incredibly brave and smart. She helped with everything. "That's so cool. My mom says she can barely handle it when the power goes out for a few hours." I laughed, remembering when I would have said the same thing. People are capable of much more than they think they are. Sometimes you just need the right circumstances to discover it. Over dinner, I listened to the girls chatter about their plans for the treehouse, their upcoming school projects, and their dreams for summer vacation. Sophie was thriving in her new environment, more confident and outgoing than she'd ever been. The trauma of what Ryan had done to us had been real, and we'd both been in therapy to process it, but it hadn't broken us. If anything, it had made us stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Stone. The criminal trial had ended 2 weeks ago with Ryan being sentenced to 8 years in prison. Now she was updating me on the civil suits. "Great news," the text read. "Natalie Peterson's assets have been located and frozen. We should be able to recover another $150,000 from her portion of the conspiracy. Also, the insurance company settled the bad faith claim for $300,000. You'll have the check by Friday." I smiled and put the phone away. The money was nice. It meant security for Sophie's future and the freedom for me to build my business slowly rather than desperately. But the real victory had been proven months ago when we walked out of that forest. After Emma went home and Sophie was settled with her homework, I stepped out onto our back porch and looked up at the stars. They were the same constellations I'd seen during our week in the wilderness, but everything else had changed. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, uncertain, dependent, always looking to others for validation. That woman wouldn't have survived what Ryan put us through. But she also wouldn't have been living this life on her own terms, trusting her own judgment about everything from career decisions to where to live. Ryan had intended to destroy me, but instead he'd freed me from the cage I hadn't even realized I was in. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Detective Rodriguez. "Mrs. Thompson, I wanted to let you know that we just arrested Tom Jackson on additional charges. Turns out he's been running an insurance fraud scheme for years, and your case gave us the leverage we needed to get his other victims to come forward." "That's good news." "It is. There's something else though. Jessica Jackson wants to meet with you. She says she has information about other things Ryan was involved in, things that might help you in civil court." I thought about it for a moment. Jessica had been one of the people who'd helped cover up Ryan's crime, but she'd also seemed genuinely shocked when the truth came out. Maybe she deserved a chance to make amends. "Set up the meeting," I said. "But it has to be on my terms in a place I choose." "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. I just want to say the way you handled this whole situation was remarkable. A lot of people wouldn't have had the strength to think strategically while dealing with that kind of betrayal." "You know what's funny?" I said, looking up at the stars again. "I didn't think I had that strength either. Turns out I just needed the right motivation to find it." After I hung up, Sophie appeared beside me on the porch. "Everything okay, Mom?" "Everything's perfect, baby. Just taking care of some final business from our old life." "Good. I like our new life better." "Me too." She hugged me tight, and I marveled at how much we'd both grown since that terrible morning when we'd returned to an empty campsite. We'd been abandoned, betrayed, and left to die, but we'd survived. More than survived, we'd thrived. Ryan was sitting in a prison cell, facing the consequences of his choices. Natalie had lost everything and was facing criminal charges in 2 states. The people who'd helped them were dealing with their own legal problems. Meanwhile, Sophie and I were building a life based on strength, honesty, and the knowledge that we could handle whatever challenges came our way. "Mom?" Sophie said as we headed back inside. "Yeah. I'm glad Daddy left us in the forest." I stopped and looked at her, concerned. "Sophie, what he did was wrong. It wasn't okay just because good things came from it." "I know that. But if he hadn't done it, we never would have learned how strong we are. We never would have had our adventure. We might have stayed in that old life forever." She was right in a way that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Ryan's betrayal had been the catalyst for us becoming who we were meant to be all along. "You're pretty wise for a 10-year-old, I said, ruffling her hair. "I learned from the best." As we settled in for the evening, I felt a deep sense of contentment. We'd been through fire and come out refined, stronger, and more sure of ourselves than ever before. The wilderness had taught us that we could survive anything. But more importantly, it had taught us that we deserved better than just survival. We deserved to thrive. And we were.